All right. Thank you so much, Rajesh and Sunita. Thank you very much for coming over. It's a lovely day, and we have one more panelist, Abhilasha. She should be coming in any moment. But let me start with Rajesh. First, let me introduce Rajesh. Rajesh is a chartered accountant. He's a partner at MSKA. It's an audit firm that is run by that is basically a Indian branch of BDO. BDO is the fifth largest tax and audit firm in the world, apart from Big Fours. I think after Big Fours. And then Rajesh is the partner for the M&A tax practice at MSKA, and he has over 20 years of experience in M&A transactions. There's a lot that we can learn from Rajesh today, how he has been helping clients and customers in reaching and helping their in reaching in helping their goals. So Rajesh, welcome aboard.
Thanks, Amit. Thanks. Looking forward.
Thank you, Rajesh. Sunita is again a veteran. She is a computer science engineer and an MBA in finance. She is a president at Let's Venture. She is the heading the practice for Let's Venture for early stage businesses. She's the one who basically helps startups grow from where they are to make them achieve great valuations and make them achieve what they want to achieve. So Sunita, welcome.
Thanks, Amit. Good to be on board.
Thank you. So let me ask the first question to Rajesh. Rajesh, uh, you are what? So what you are doing at the moment is that like after you graduated from 10th and 11th and 12th, did was CA the only option you had?
So, Amit, you take me back to my school days. I always had it in mind to say that, I want to become a chartered accountant. And honestly, at that point of time, we really had very limited options as to what you want to do. And science was certainly not my forte. I never used to enjoy science as a subject in school as well. So from a commerce perspective, I thought, being a CA was probably something which excited me, and I was relatively good at accounts subjects like accounts and maths. So that's the reason why I pursued CA. It's been a good journey. Nothing to complain. But yeah, I mean, looking at the career options that the generation now has, I mean, yeah, I think they are far more lucky enough to be where they are today.
Yes, yes, Rajesh. So, I think long back the options were few. Now there are many options, as we discussed offline as well. Rajesh, tell us a bit more about MSKA and about BDO.
Sure. BDO is a global accounting firm. The way you spoke of Big Four, which is EY, KPMG, BDO. It's not BDO, but EY, KPMG, Deloitte, and PwC. These are the four global accounting firms. BDO is number 5, present in almost 167 countries globally. In India, they are partnered with the firm called MSKA and Associates. So, no, I'm not sure, how many of you must be knowing, but from an Institute of Chartered Accountants of India perspective, if you want to carry out audit practice, you need to have an Indian audit firm, and which is MSKA. So all the assurance and audit practices being carried out by MSK, whereas all the advisory and consulting practices being done by another LLP that we have formed called BDO India LLP. So, from a service perspective, we have the traditional practice of audit and tax advisory. But from, deals perspective, we have an entire gamut, which includes valuations. Uh, we have uh, we have a diligence practice. We have an M&A tax practice. We also have a insolvency practice. So various facets involving deals. Yeah, that's the limited introduction about BDO and MSK.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rajesh, for setting the initial context right. Uh, Let me go to Sunita. Sunita, tell us more about yourself and who is Sunita? What does she like? What she does not like? Who she eats with? Who she sits with? What kind of music listen to?
Right now, eating and sitting only with family, right? We can't afford to do anything else. better be that way to be safe right now, right? Bangalorean, I think at my generation, everybody pretty much actually got into engineering, right? So that's where my computer science thing also started. But having said that, I think I had an intention to get into finance because of the domain in which I worked in computer science as well. And that's when I moved on to do my B school. And in the last 10 years, I've been in the VC space as well, right? Apart from other, initial stints which I had done. And the first few years in Avishkar, which is an impact investment VC, and in the last 6.5 odd years with Let's Venture. And Let's Venture basically is an online platform for startups to raise funds. We today have 3 different verticals. I had the early stage vertical, which is where startups end up raising anywhere between 100K to $1 million and a half dollars from HNIs and micro funds. We have a SaaS product called ESOP, My Startup Equity, for ESOP and cap table digitization and management. And another vertical called EV Plus for growth and late stage investments, right? So kind of trying to be there across the spectrum from a seed to IPO for a startup, right? So just being there at different stages of a startup's life.
Excellent. So, what stage of startup do you like personally? Since you are currently focusing on the early stage portfolios.
Yeah. Actually, that is the most exciting, right? Because I think that's where there are turning points of how startups actually grow into different stages. You actually look at companies which have just created their MVPs, companies which are just trying out monetization models, which means you're there through to see what are the different ways in which the companies actually either make mistakes or are able to actually become bigger through different kind of processes. And I think at the early stage, the key part is also in terms of founder, right? Or what happens over the course of time is you're looking at the processes and the product and the revenue which the company has made, lesser on the founder. But I think in the early stages, it's a lot more about founder instincts, which you actually follow through to be able to make investments. So definitely way more exciting than growth and late stage investments for sure.
So are you saying founders are more important than the idea itself?
Idea is important, but founders are more important, mainly because if you are a really smart founder, you can tomorrow, based on how the market is actually working, you can pivot, right? You know how to react to market conditions, you know how to react and change according to what is needed for the business, rather than saying, this is my idea and I just need to go according to the same thing and not morph, right? So idea will actually keep changing. You would have seen enough pivots in startups life. So it all depends on the founder actually, because they are the most important part of your startup.
Absolutely. I cannot agree with you more. Abhilasha, although we caught you having your meal, but let me introduce you now. So Abhilasha is,
Breakfast and lunch, so I've just been I already had a very crazy morning, so
yeah, don't worry about
sorry
it.
about that.
No problem, no problem. So Abhilasha is a founder and CEO of a company called Venturator, a self-proclaimed misfit. She always wanted to make a difference, grabbing every opportunity with both hands along the way. In 2013, Abhilasha started Venturator, and it's an online marketplace that connects startups with ecosystem enablers. And that's a very interesting definition of a company, an online marketplace which connects startups with the ecosystem enablers. Let me ask you to first of all throw some more light on this, on your business venture.
Sure. So, I started my journey as a part of Your Story. Your Story at that time was yourstory.in. So we were like the first team of about 5 people, and, just really getting introduced to the very, very nascent Indian startup ecosystem. I realized at that time, a lot of these guys, they're out of colleges, they have brilliant ideas, but they don't have the right direction. So that space of ambiguity is something that I wanted to capture through the Venturator, because a lot of these guys, given that, the ecosystem is also just figuring it out in 2010, 2011, a lot of these guys, would invest a lot of time into actually connecting to the right guys instead of just staying focused on the product or the service they're trying to build. So as a journalist, I also ended up building a huge network around myself. My social equity grew, and I realized there is probably a gap here where we can help early stage founders stay focused on the product that they're trying to build, and we connect them to the right ecosystem enablers. And when I say ecosystem enablers, I mean everybody, right from legal guys, tech guys, CAs, CS, the right talent, mentors, investors, and so on and so forth. So that's the that was the initial initial plan of how the Venturator started, which is
So
just to,
basically,
to put it simply, help a startup founder go from point A to point B in the shortest time span.
basically the founder can come onto your platform, and if whatever services or help he or she will need, all those helps
Yes,
are available on your platform.
exactly. Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. How many startups have registered on your platform, Abhilasha?
So over the past 6 years now, we've had more than 7,500 startups that we have touched in some way or form. We now primarily focus on fundraising because that's where we make our money. You show them the green, kind of like, take a cut out of it. Exactly what Let's Venture also does really well. So our focus now has become fundraising, but it started with just connecting them to the right people, and that over a period of time has been more than 7,500 startups.
Fabulous. That's a great growth story, Abhilasha. So, are the startups only from India or they from worldwide?
So it started with India because India itself has a huge market. It is a different dynamic altogether. It's a very thriving ecosystem. That is where where an ecosystem is still growing. There's a lot of work for other ecosystem players as well, right? So it started with that, but as the ecosystem also progressed, we realized that there are a lot of investors outside India that are looking to invest in who have like sort of bought into the high growth Indian story. So now we have like kind of scaled it up to beyond India, where we connect even Indian startups who want to move out. We are the right platform to go to, so that it's not just about India or Asia anymore. It's a larger story.
Interesting. And what's the story behind living in UK?
So I moved to UK in 2017. I realized that in India, the list of angels is a very, very small network. And somehow if the angel investors don't increase, then there is no way that the more companies will be at a point where they can raise further rounds, right? And it's also a very close-knit network. So if you're not out of an IIT, there's a less chance that your pitch deck will even reach a Sequoia Capital. So how do you enable ideas that are coming, which are like really on ground, epic entrepreneurs, epic startups? How do you enable them with that early cash so that they can kind of move forward, right? And reach a point where they can raise more capital. So I realized that the US startup ecosystem has a lot of risk appetite. Europe has been like behind in the run, so to speak, because it's a very financially robust system. They don't have the whole startup energy vibe, and like I said earlier, where the vibe is not there, the opportunity is higher. So I started interacting with a few angel investors over here, typically NRIs who wanted to invest in Asia. And I realized that, this is the space where I want to be, sell to them the Indian story, help them dispose their liquid cash into a high growth ecosystem, and help them make returns, so that, you kind of like democratize investing, right? It cannot be just one small set of people investing in so many brilliant ideas. So you need to like make the supply and demand at par for the competition to be healthy. So that is how the UK story built in. London is obviously the most cosmopolitan of all European countries, so it made more sense to come to the UK. UK also is very, very aggressively looking at tying up from a government level, is also looking very aggressively to tie up with the Indian ecosystem. So a lot of factors look like this was the right next move to take.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Abhilasha, for explaining so well what you do. I think we totally get what you do now. Sunita, taking cues from Abhilasha's sentence of founders from pedigree institutes like IITs, IIMs, ISBs end up securing more funding, or funding, so to say, rather than founders who are not from such fancy institutes. When you look at the founders, how important is the fact that they are from a pedigree institute or not?
It actually is not, to be very frank. While I think what she mentioned to an extent was right, because they have a network already created, right? So if you are from, say, IIT Bombay, you already have a really large alumni network who's ready to support you because you're an alum. That always adds as an advantage to these guys. But having said that, today I think we have seen enough founders and unicorn founders who are not from any of these, IITs or IIMs who have actually come out, because of which people are okay to look at all the other founders as well, right? So today, if you look at our platform, we roughly say do anywhere between 10 to 15 transactions in a month. And I would say maybe 3 or 4 of them might be from ITs and the rest are not, right? So it's not a necessity that everybody is from that pedigree, but people do look for key traits, right? In terms of saying, hey, you know what, at early stages especially, are you coachable? Do you know the market really well enough, right? It's not just, again, even if you are from an IT and if you don't know your market, you still don't get funded, because you need to know way more than the guy who's actually sitting across the table writing the check, right? So that becomes most important. Do you understand the market? Today, again, we do see a lot of SaaS companies getting funded. And if you are a SaaS company and if you're doing enterprise sales, you also need to have that experience in terms of selling as well, right? So somebody who is 23 might not have the same experience. So he will at least have either a co-founder who's maybe done it for a few years, or the team itself actually is much more senior. So today, average age of founders is increased to 30 plus, which means they're coming with that experience from their background to be able to build the business too.
Okay, cool. Excellent. So yes, you need not be from Pedigree Institute if you want a funding from Less Venture. It's about what values you have, whether you're trainable or not, whether you know what you're doing or not, whether you have your head on your shoulder or not. I think these are factors which people like Less Venture look at. Great. Thank you so much. Rajesh, coming to you. A lot of startups. Sunita mentioned that the average age for founders in India is about 30, which means they already have worked somewhere and now they're venturing into their own business. Now, even when they are venturing into their own business, in the beginning, let's say 1, 2, 3 years, their accounts and finances and compliances are all over the place. What would you, and perhaps because that's not the core business, that's and having a CFO is too expensive. What would you recommend to these people? How can they reduce costs and still manage their books properly?
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I mean, as you correctly put it, I mean, as an entrepreneur, my focus is going to be on business. So all of these, compliances which are not really going to add value to my business, I would typically want to, I mean, you may not want to have permanent people on your payroll looking at all of these things, and therefore you have many service providers who can take care of all your compliances day in and day out. But honestly, I mean, we've seen this on many transactions. We've seen such small things like people believe that once you have the certificate of incorporation from the ROC, your company is ready and you are kind of ready to do business, and forget the rest of it. But when you actually go for fundraising, you come out with so many minor issues. For example, the share certificate is not there in place. If it is there, it is not stamped adequately. And, all such small things can raise a red flag and can destroy your entire transactions. You need to be very, very careful that though these are all compliances, and unfortunately, whatever one may say, India still is still in the tangled up with various regulations, be it Companies Act, income tax, GST. FEMA is something which which is very, very at a very nascent stage, and not many of the entrepreneurs forget entrepreneurs. I'm saying in many of the corporates are not aware of what the compliances are under FEMA, which is Foreign Exchange Management Act. These things are meant to be looked at right from day one, so that when you are ready for a fundraise, these things don't bother you.
So let's say Less Venture has agreed to invest into somebody's startup, and you are supposed to do a due diligence for them. What are the deal breakers in the due diligence? What non-compliances are the deal breakers in these due diligence?
See, I mean, the deal breakers, I mean, the non-compliances may not be as severe as a deal breaker, but yes, certain positions that you may have taken from a tax perspective, could lead to a potentially long liability for you, or a large liability for you in future, which could then impact your valuation, which will then go to kind of as a deal breaker, or the deal closure can get extended. So for example, there are certain non-compliances which the investor wants you to first make good, and then only he's willing to talk to you further on closing the transaction. So it could be either ways. Either it could be a deal breaker altogether, or it can push the transaction by at least 6 to 8 months, which then will again put your entire valuation at stake.
Interesting. Now, since you spoke about valuation, Rajesh, I've seen a lot of companies whose valuation sometimes is 5x the revenue, 10x the revenue, 30x, 40x, 100x the revenue. So how, and these valuations are sometimes driven from the air. You just pull some number and this is my valuation, right? And they're getting funding also on those valuations driven from the air. What's your take on valuations?
So honestly, Amit, I think the valuation. I would simply put it. What the buyer is willing to give you is the valuation. I mean, as a promoter, you'll obviously want to say that my business is worth X $1 million or $Y $1 million. But effectively, when you're talking to a matured investor, he has seen the world, he has seen the businesses all around, and therefore it is always the large the investors who are probably more on their head to say this is something which is very, very aspirational, but yes, we will help you achieve that valuation once we write the boat along with you, say maybe 2 years, 3 years, whatever. So there is never a standard answer to say what is the right method of valuation. It is always going to be how the buyer and the seller look at it, and how they perceive it, that in the long run what will be the value that each of them will contribute in the long run.
Excellent. Thank you for answering that. Let me ask the same question to Sunita as well. Sunita, how do you determine the valuation of a particular startup? Do you do it yourself? Do you appoint a chartered accountant like Rajesh? What methods do you use to determine the valuation of a startup?
In the early stages, there are no numbers of it. So it's very difficult, to be very frank, even for a chartered accountant to actually come up with a number. And like he said, it's also about what the other side is willing to pay, right? And founders always have expectations. But, while I think there is no direct science, to some extent, there are certain aspects which you look at, right? Also based on the amount you're raising, how much are you ready to dilute, right? If you're raising anywhere between a crore, crore and a half, okay, I'm ready to dilute, say a 10 to 15%. And if I'm doing like a 2 or 3 crore, maximum, say a 20, 22%. And again, at what stage you are in, what are your numbers like? All of those matter. Again, founder will make a lot of difference, right? If you're a serial entrepreneur, your numbers change dramatically, just because I know as an investor that your capacity to be able to build the business and maybe look at an exit for me is always going to be higher. So I wouldn't think twice about a valuation there, because I know that you have the capability to build a business. So, you will look at more from a dilution perspective to say, if it's a first round, how much am I okay to dilute, right, for a particular quantum, and actually go about it from that aspect, rather than a pure, hey, you know what, I want this, are you okay to give? You'll also be able to kind of trade off between that numbers. Sometimes in even revenue-based businesses, there are multiples, right? You do know, so for a SaaS company in a Series A, it's 5 to 7x, but in early stages end up becoming anywhere between 10 to 17x, right? So you will, in revenue-based companies, you'll be able to do a little more science there, compared to, say, a consumer internet company where there might be no revenue today, or even if there is, it's not like a recurring revenue which they will have.
All right, thank you so much. So what Sunita is saying, that it depends on many factors. One of the very important factors is consumer, the founders, what stage you are at, and it's what stage of startup you are at, and whether you have already exited a few companies in the past. That gives you a lot of confidence to the investor when he puts his money in. Thank you so much, Sunita, for throwing light on that. Abhilasha, so. If let's say your now objective from what it was about a few years back was to make founders meet multiple people like CAs, lawyers, others, investors. Now it is primarily going towards helping them in investment. Why did you pivot? And if you're looking to make investors meet with the startups, wouldn't US be a better country for you to be in?
Yeah. So actually, good question. But we did not pivot per se. So we're doing the same thing. Fundraising is an extension of what we did. We, even when we were connecting startups with with ecosystem enablers, we were also connecting them with investors. It just made more business sense for us to take a cut out of the the fundraise that we did, and it also, like, over a period of time we learned the basics of fundraising, right? Literally grounds up. It's like a small size investment bank. So essentially you help companies get investment ready, get them their first meeting with an investor, and get them to pitch, right? Because that is the first opportunity for a lot of entrepreneurs where they themselves are pretty baffled, what is the exact conversation going to be like. And you get that one chance with an investor, so you want to make sure that you've given your 100% to it. To your second question, why is US a better market? Definitely US is a better market, but the best thing about UK and London is that it's well connected with both Asia and the US, right? Geographically also it is placed right in the middle, and even the network over here, it's a very import export industry anyway, in every sense, right? Like even with products, services, everything. UK is a catalyst for a lot of things that are happening in the US, and the trend picks up in the UK. That is where the investors get conditioned that this is something that's going to become something huge in Asia, and so the money flows towards the east. Therefore, US definitely is by far the most amazing market to do a startup in, because I think the amount of risk appetite that US has, the amount of ability they have to invest in innovation, take that kind of risk, is epic. But I think UK has the capital and it needs direction. So that is where we feel we have identified an opportunity.
Fabulous, fabulous. Great. Good to know that perspective, Abhilasha. Sunita, coming back to you, when, let's say, you guys are investing into a startup, how important is the IP for you?
Very few companies actually have per se an IP, right? To be very frank, a lot of companies, if you see today, are tech-enabled companies because it's more disruption from how you distribute certain aspects. So today you're seeing D2C, it's tech-enabled, but what used to be there earlier on, you're actually changing how the distribution is happening. Ola, again, or anything in that bucket, was more traditional business, which actually got tech-enabled, and they created a lot of things on top of it to be able to put it. So there are very few companies which have very core IP, right? In terms of either, say, life science companies, EV currently, a lot of EV companies which are coming in, AI, ML companies, those are the ones which actually have core IPs and truly actually even think of value in their IP from that aspect, right? Rest of the guys actually don't even think of it from an IP perspective. It's more in terms of a capital cost for me to be able to build my technology to enable the kind of things which I want to do. So I would say from an overall market perspective itself, you will see roughly only around 15-20% of the companies which have true IP from a core business perspective, right? Everybody else is actually building on certain things which are already there and actually layering on top of those things.
Right.
So from that way, it might not be as important because everything else will also kind of add on. Core IP may not be the only case where we actually look at it.
So that's a very important thing which you have said, Sunita. We in IP law firms, we focus only on IP, right? So 60% or 65% of our clients are from the US, and we do not have to, and some of them are raising funds, some of them have already raised funds, and they've since people who have raised funds are also aggressive on IP. We're filing more and more patents for them in India and US. People who are raising funds are also very aggressive on IP because investors in the US really want to know what's your goddamn IP. How will you protect yourself? How will you stop competition? And a patent, for example, can answer all these tough questions an investor going to ask. Now that mindset, which is there in the US at the moment about IP, in the investors as well as in the founders, that mindset is not there in India yet. And for that, so therefore, we are doing a lot of sessions in India. We're doing a lot of trainings and courses in India and a lot of corporates and stuff like that. So, and So what I'm talking about is incremental things. In India, also people have something and they build something on this. This incremental steps, which let's say founders are making, are adding. Their small incremental, let's say features they're added is IP worthy, which is not a lot of founders know that they can have patents for these incremental steps as well, the incremental innovations as well. I think that's very important for our people, our founders to know that you need not have to have a breakthrough invention in order to file a patent. You need not invent CDMA or GSM. The breakthrough inventions era has gone. I mean CDMA was a breakthrough invention, GSM was a breakthrough invention about 25-30 years back. But all these 20, 30, 40 years, people are generally doing incremental inventions. Now, coming to Rajesh. So Rajesh, when you are doing, let's say, merger and acquisition, I'm sure there's also when you merge one company with another, and there's a lot of IP transfer agreements and IP that uh, exchange hands from one company to another. How do you go about IP licensing and IP transferring in an M&A transaction?
Amit, I would rather put a question like or give an answer to you like this. What we've seen in some of the transactions, is historically, I don't know, for whatever mindset or prevails amongst the promoters, they used to always have a IP housed in a separate entity or maybe in their personal name vis-a-vis the business. Now, when you're looking at having of the business per se, or you're looking to kind of invite the strategic investor into your company, I think the first question they will ask is, why is the IP not forming part of the core business? Why is it there in your hands? I think probably Jet Airways was also one such example when you were looking to sell out. The brand or the trademark was registered in the name of the promoter and not in the name of the operating company. So I think this is one very critical aspect which one needs to be very mindful of. To say you can't segregate the two. They cannot be kept out of each other. You have to build it. You have to build have it under one umbrella. Because sooner or later there will be a situation where you will have to have the entire IP and the business under one roof. And if you don't do that, you are certainly going to face a huge tax cost in the future, which you may or may not like it. So if you're starting from day one, I think this is an important factor for you to keep in mind. Sorry, I'm not
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, you are absolutely right, Rajesh. I think I cannot agree with you more. One more thing I want to ask you is a lot of government schemes, Rajesh, which you will be aware about, which the government of India is offering in terms of funding to the startups. What roles CAs and people like you play in getting these funds from the government to the startups?
So I think what is of primary importance is for you to get yourself registered with the government portal, the Startup India portal, and what requires over there is a demonstration of what your business is and how it is going to lead you, how it is going to benefit either from the country perspective or employment generation perspective. So that hand holding is very critical. And once you are able to give that comfort or help the promoters in getting that sorted, then the registration is very, very simple. It takes probably not more than a week. And once you have that registration certificate, then the funding thereafter also becomes relatively easier. So I think getting yourself the adequate documentation or paperwork for you to get yourself registered is the key over here.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Rajesh. Abhilasha, coming back to you, uh, let's say startups from India and startups from UK.
Yeah.
How would you compare these two types of startups based upon their geography?
Um, so a startup in US in UK is a very enterprise SaaS oriented startup that usually raises money. There are less consumer tech companies over here because it's a very fragmented market. Obviously the dynamics of the mass market that India brings, and the recent penetration of mobile and internet and all of that, is a very, very raw and opportunistic land vis-a-vis the UK. So what we see over here is a very different set of entrepreneurs, because they are very tech oriented. They want to do deep tech, machine learning kind of products, that basically sells to bigger enterprises, vis-a-vis doing something that is very consumer driven. In India, what I see is absolutely different, right? Because in India, some of the biggest unicorns are, in fact, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 90% of the unicorns in India are, consumer companies, because it's a mass market they're serving. I think the dynamics of that is very different. There's a very different way of evaluating a B2B company vis-a-vis a B2C company. And even the hustle in the entrepreneur becomes very different, because here you're doing pure sales to bigger companies. So you understand the industry mindset and then you pitch accordingly. But when you're doing consumer, literally selling to everyone, right? So then that kind of mindset is very different. So the levels of hustle is very different between entrepreneurs, simply because the kind of geographies they serve at a core level are very different.
I totally agree with you. Now, taking cues from what Abhilasha said, my next question is to Sunita. Sunita, just rewording what Abhilasha said. Abhilasha said that in India, the startups are primarily transactional. They want to do more and more transactions, whether it's Cred or Zomato or Ola or whatsoever. Do more transactions, get more valuation. Do more transactions, get more valuation. There's no technology involved in the startups. Whereas if you go to the West, if you go to the US, the startups are technology focused. They're inventing new technologies, new solutions to problems which were there, which are there, which will come. So when will we shift from being a transactional startup to a technology startup? There's a gap between them.
We already have, and I think you won't shift from being a transactional this thing to something else, right? Both will coexist. One, because like she said, it's mass market. We have a huge population for which you need, today we don't even have basic services to a large market, right? Which means you need to use technology to be able to serve that whole 1.3 billion people who we have in our country. How can I actually tier them, look at different services? How can I create products for all of these people to be able to transact? So that I don't think will ever go away. Having said that, from a IPO slash deep company, right? Today you are actually seeing that shift also happening. One, again, like she mentioned, actually Freshdesk was the only SaaS company which actually went unicorn, right, Abhilasha? From there on, we are seeing a lot more interest from investors as well to be looking at SaaS companies, which means companies are comfortable going to an Indian VC and saying, hey, okay, you know what? Now are you okay to look at funding? Because the mindset is changing. If you are a deep tech company, the number of people who can understand the deep tech technology as well as fund you in India is very low, right? Because of which most of the companies which might have very solid technology actually also move to the US and try raise funding in the US, because risk-taking capacity is extremely high, like she again mentioned. Even the investor risk-taking capacity is dramatically higher in the US. So startups who are looking at core technology, where it's research driven, because I don't know, another 4 years. So we actually funded a few companies in the US, which were some cancer research, somebody else who's looking at reducing, how do you actually reduce rats being used for, for testing. You wouldn't look at something like that in India. There, people are ready to pump in money and say it's okay for you to take 7 or 8 years, right? Build that research and then we will look at commercialization, right? Here, that risk averse nature is actually still very high. And that's why even when you see investor base, while today angel investors are coming in, they're all senior professionals, people who've been in startups, you will still see large checks being very few from an Indian domestic investor, right? Extremely large checks are still coming from outside because of that reason itself. From a general mindset of Indians has been risk averse, which has been changing though, right? We are seeing that shift from Indian investors, from family offices, actually changing to looking at more risky assets. And I think it's just a course of time. I think we will move into that bucket where we don't want our startups to actually go register in the US, actually be here and build, while yes, global market is still going to be the key for revenue making capacities and stuff.
So yes, having said all of that, B2B versus B2C, B2B SaaS versus B2C transactions, number of people, and all of that. I want to take a real life example here. So one of my clients, Gupshup Technologies, you might know them. Biru Seth is the founder. He was also the founder of Upwork. We filed the patent applications for Gupshup. Now, Gupshup Technologies has a revenue of almost $150 million. They recently got a funding of $100 million from Tiger Global in the US. This is one company. So at a valuation of $1.4 billion. So revenue was 150 mil ARR and valuation was 1.4 bill. If you look at, so this is one company. If you look at Clubhouse, started 1 year back, valuation of almost $4 billion, almost no revenue. Now, and now let's talk to a founder. Where do you want to be? I mean, Gupshup took 15 years to build an ARR of 150 mil and then a valuation of 1.4 bill. And where this bunch of folks, one of this Clubhouse founders is an Indian, Rohan Seth, $4 billion valuation in just 1 year. So should founders who have a lot of energy and capacity and a lot of, let's say, enthusiasm, should they be looking at should they be solving B2B SaaS problems, or should they venture into a B2C company?
I don't think there is a cookie cutter model there, Amit, to be very frank, right? It's also about what is it that you can actually as an individual achieve? Where is it that you have an understanding, right? And say if I am a very solid tech person, I will try and build something on the technology aspect to be able to, cater into particular segment. Maybe I'm from a healthcare segment. I will look at that. If I am somebody who is understanding sales like Abhilash was mentioning, I will look at enterprise SaaS and I will look at a very different domain. So it's also about my own capabilities as a founder. I don't think there is going to be something where I'll say, hey, you know what, because you're a younger person, you look at A, and if you have A, B, C, D kind of things, you look at B. I don't think it will work, right? It's very individualistic. It's also where I see that there is a problem or there is a gap. Right? What you might find as a gap, I might actually not even find it as a gap. I'm being very frank. Just your own example of Clubhouse. I think 90% of the world just thought, I don't think this is going to work. Who's going to listen to audio stuff? It's not going to work, right? And it was a fad. Like, everybody joined on Clubhouse. It's a fad. Everybody joined in. And that's where I think the momentum actually got built up so much for them to be at where they are today. Right. Like you said, no revenue. There are enough companies in India also where there has been no revenue, but they've actually gotten really high valuations. Also because of what? One, they were able to create a technology or able to create a service where there was adoption, which was there, right? That's where your user data is, where you know that tomorrow I can actually figure out 30 mechanisms for me to actually monetize. A lot of companies actually build on their user base first before monetizing, because if you don't have the user base and start on day one from monetization, you might not get those numbers, right? So people say, okay, I will burn money, I will get that user base, then I will think of monetization. You need to have supporting investors alongside as well to say, okay, let's go ahead because I do trust in this judgment. But that's the way it would be, right? So I don't think there is a particular way. I don't know if other folks actually feel differently, but
no, I totally agree with you. I think
Amit, I just want to add something here, if
Sure.
I may. So I completely agree with what Sunita just said, right? And I think 2 points. Firstly, this whole building for valuation mentality really needs to be wiped out. You build for solving a problem, period. You cannot be building because you need to grow your personal wealth. That is a function of being passionately perseverant about a problem that you're trying to solve. And I think once this like completely needs to be erased from an entrepreneur's mind, because it's very dangerous. You're building for all the wrong reasons then. Secondly, I think as an ecosystem, we're 15 years behind the US. So at any point when we make this comparison, we will be behind. Now, what is amazing, and as a country, we have been behind, right? Across services, across industries. So there's only so much you can, blame a particular startup ecosystem. As a country, there's so many things that we still need to learn from the West. I think what we should focus on is the fact that we are here. We are here where we see 10 unicorns coming in 1 month. I think for 2008, Sunita, if you were part of the ecosystem back then, we wouldn't have imagined something like this happening, right, in the country. I think you're wonderfully ahead, and there's so much more to be built in India. I think we have to stop comparing with valuations in the West, because they have a lot of other privileges with them, which we don't. But I think we'll get there. So I think that those 2 points I wanted to make. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely, Abhilash. Thank you so much for highlighting those. Uh, Rajesh, coming to you, you have been listening very patiently. Uh, my question to you is, how do people like you, how do CAs help uh, startups become successful?
So very clearly, we are not businessmen. But just taking a cue from the question that you had asked earlier as to how do these startups take care of all their compliances? So one obvious thing is we can be there to take care of all of their regulatory compliances, so that they need to only focus on business. Yes. Second thing, we can also help them from the perspective of uh, uh, some of the business strategies which we would have which we experienced while discussing with other clients as to what should be right, what should be how do we go about with a particular market or a particular product. Again, there is a limitation to the extent that which we can guide them, but yes, we will always be there with the entrepreneurs to say, this is, if you do this, probably this is something which may benefit you in the long run. And also keeping their long-term objective in mind, to say that one day you will look at inviting investors. How do these investors look at you as a company, is how we is the kind of guidance we give to these entrepreneurs on a routine basis.
Do you also connect these startups with investors?
Yes, we do have a network, of private equity funds or venture capitalists who we can connect to the entrepreneurs, where then that we can then help them on the entire transaction. So the entire transaction cycle, right from the term sheet stage up to the culmination of the fundraise, is where we can be associated with the startups.
So a lot of startups, I'm sure, also come to you. They have great idea, great team, but they have no money, and they want your help. What do you do about them?
So honestly, I think as the other panelists have also spoken about, you need to start up with some investment of your own. You can't be looking at an angel investor or a seed investor from day one, because if you think of doing that, stay rest assured you'll be giving away at least 50% of your equity on day one, which is really not a good thing to do from the promoter's perspective. So it is always going to be important for you to stay glued on to having at least some bit of your skin in the game. You may be having brilliant ideas, but you also need to then marry it with some bit of finance at your end, which is something which the angel investors will want to look at.
Sure, yes. So, Sunita, what do you do about these startups who are running out of cash, who ran out of cash, and they now desperately looking for funding, or desperate startups? How do you deal with them?
Oh, one of the most difficult this is, right? And I think as a founder, it's extremely important to know how long your runway is, right? And start early and not be in the last moment to say, I have 1 month runway. Now, how am I going to raise funds, right? More often than not, investors are also very skeptical about funding such companies because they don't think you're able to manage your own finances, right? All of us know you will run out of money. It's fine, but you need to plan ahead. You know that, you know what, just even in fundraise quantums, right? When a company is actually coming to fundraise, we tell them raise at least for 12 months. Because if you have to go out for a fundraise again, you need to show some movement or some growth from your own end. And it might take anywhere between 3 to 5 months for you to raise your next round, which means in 6-7 months, you're actually going out to the market again, right? So if you raise only for 6 months, you are closing this round and going to the market again, which basically is not going to give you any upside from your own perspective, right? So it's important to think how much do you need to raise before you actually kind of go ahead to the market and raise funds. investors are very skeptical, and except for say existing investors, assume for whatever reason, say like COVID hit, we all know that it was unprecedented. Now nobody expected that things will shut like this and people will just go to zero in a day, right? It happened to a lot of startups. Actually, they just went to zero in a day. In those circumstances, existing investors actually pump in a little more money because they know execution is not a problem. Founder has his heart in the right place. I'm okay to keep it afloat. Still, we are able to figure out certain things, right? And even in certain circumstances, founders said, "Hey, you know what? We'll cut down salaries." All of those were actually kind of made sure that we are not just burning investors' money because we're getting the same, right? So, existing investors are the ones who actually come to your rescue at that point in time. But having said that, if you have a 3-4 month runway and you know that you're actually going out to raise that intermittent funding before your Series A round, right? And you know that you're getting there from a metrics perspective, right? You know the Series A metrics or even your Series B metrics are in sight, say maybe a 6 to 8 month timeline is where you can actually go out to external investors as well to be able to raise funds who'll be comfortable because they know that path is there. But money out tomorrow, I don't think people look at it very comfortably in terms of funding them.
Absolutely. But you know what? A lot of startups generally would, let's say, start ahead of time, and they know they have about 6 months of runway and they can start now, but they're not able to raise money even in 6 months. They're doing their bit, but they're not able to raise money. And then a lot of time they would beg, borrow, steal, they would mortgage their house, they would take loans from their family and friends. Uh, what do you suggest them? What do you advise them?
Hey, if you believe in your company, you got to do what you got to do, right? You will do it. And I think it is, if it's your company and you know that you want to actually take it forward, you do whatever it takes to be able to do it, right? Sometimes market can act against you because external factors could be affecting your fundraise. Or again, like I said, you might not just be there as yet for somebody else to take that bet on you, right? We've seen, even on our own platform, to be very frank, we see roughly around 500 to 600 companies who register on a monthly basis, right? And all of these companies are not ready to fundraise today, right? And we've seen companies come back 2 years later and saying, "Hey, okay, now I'm ready because I think I have what it takes for external people to look at actually funding me," right? So it's important, if you really believe in your company, you will figure out mechanisms, right? Like in terms of saying, "Hey, you know what? Okay, if you are, say, a brand, you will look at RBF. If you are, you can actually take convertibles from your own family and friends. If they actually believe in you, they are the ones who will actually support you as well, right? So you will do it if you really believe in the story. I think you'll be able to get that done. Like I said, if you have something which people know that they're able to trust that you're going to be able to reach that next milestone, external folks also will be able to commit to that. And we support in those aspects too. We have had our own portfolio companies who have gone through certain crises. People have committed because they knew that the company will be able to get to their next stages.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So that's a great point, Sunita. Abhilasha, since you have the experience of walking through 7,500 startups, according to you, what are the main reasons startup fail?
There's so many factors why startups fail, but I think a startup in its early stage is not a professional setup; it's a personal setup. So usually, it is the entrepreneur who gives up for whatever reasons, does not feel like he can pursue this with the same passion that he started it. Is the reason why he calls it quits. Which I've seen that for people want to do a startup for various reasons. They're not really, they don't have the entrepreneurial DNA. They want to do it because a friend did it and raised some money, and now he's all over the news. So now he's really excited about that journey. And I think, that fizzles out. The whole gung ho about being an entrepreneur eventually fizzles out, because when you get into the skin of the game, you realize that this is not easy. It's going to be, nobody tells you about the kind of hurdles that you face as an early stage founder, and not everyone's built with that DNA to be problem solving, and to have that metal to keep your sanity while you go through this whole process. And I feel that they reach the point where they feel, yeah, let's just take up a job, in a corporate, we would be doing much better. So I've seen most of the entrepreneurs, just fizzle out in terms of energy. Obviously, there are times where the market, timing is so important. You could be doing a startup, today, which would actually make sense maybe 5 years later, because the supporting ecosystem has grown, right? Like doing a D2C company today is receiving money. I know for a fact 10 years ago, when just horizontal e-commerce had just come, at that time DTC or vertical e-commerce would not have raised money, right? And so everything has a timing, everything has external macro factors that you have to take into account when you are initiating, solving for something. And having said all of that, you have to be so committed to building a company. It's more than the commitment of a marriage. I think, even in a marriage you would think for once that you want to walk out. With this, you have to just really take yourself through it. So that is the reason why I feel that many companies don't make it to the next round.
Excellent. That's a great tip. Great tips, Abhilasha. So, in this last round, we have a few minutes to go. In this last round, if the speakers have a question to a fellow speaker, you can shoot now.
Oh, you should have had us prepared.
I know.
I am not prepared either. I'm just talking to you. You can also talk.
Amit, stop crowdsourcing questions.
So Amit, you've been asking us questions. Now probably we can ask you a question as to what has been your experience dealing with the startups.
Yes,
So
sure.
my question
Yeah.
for you, Amit, is what is by far the most interesting startup that you've worked with? And it doesn't necessarily have to be a very successful one, but sometimes you meet just the right guys doing even things at a small scale, but everybody needs a CA and legal help. So which is the most interesting thus far in your portfolio?
So yes, Rajesh, what was your question?
No, my question was only very general to say what has been your experience of dealing with these startups? I mean,
Yes. So right, so let me explain to you my own experience, our own experience, guys. So being an engineer and a lawyer, unfortunately, हमें गोरो ने train कर दिया था. We went to the US and Motorola में we got training in from US patent lawyers. So we understood how the patent system work in the US, and we came back to India, data law and all of that. So in this, we have been fortunate enough, the people in IP field have been fortunate enough to talk to founders mainly, because idea unko generally aata hai, and then they want to protect their ideas. They are like, either they are CTOs or CEOs or PhDs or doctors or scientists. So we on an everyday basis are talking to these folks who are very passionate about their ideas. Now sometimes they have money, sometimes they don't have money. So we try to help as many people as possible in protecting their IP, because a lot of our clients, and 65% of them are from the US, they say we'll pay you later, and we are okay with that. Let's file a patent first, and we'll give them some payment terms of 60 days, 90 days, and they pay us later after they secure a funding round based upon their IP. Interesting startups. So one of my clients, they solve a fantastic problem of sugarcane juice, ganne ka juice. Now, ganne ka juice is a roadside commodity, and we always like ganne ka juice, but we are always hesitant about the hygiene and the flies around and all of that. So these people identify, the people love ganne ka juice, but they are worried about quality and hygiene. So they invented a ganne ka juice ka vending machine, where you just press a button. गन्ने आप डाले हुए हैं, you press a button, गन्ने का juice comes from the vending machine, and there's zero human intervention. So we filed a patent for them, the vending machine. They would store the ganna sticks, the sugarcane sticks in the machine. You press a button, how the sticks will fall one by one in the machine. One stick will go in the crusher, and the crusher will crush the stick, and the sticks have to fall one by one. If too many sticks fall, the machine will go bonkers. So how the sticks will fall one by one in the machine, how the stick will go into a crusher, how each stick will give you about 75% of the glass filled. So that patent we filed, and it got granted in about 8 months in India. Another very, very promising startup is iMocha. It's a Pune-based startup. iMocha is basically it's a video which, let's say, they would test somebody's English on a video, and the AI behind the video is checking your English. So there's somebody observing you, judging you on your English, and all these tests, which these video IMOCA software is being used by Microsoft. And about 3 weeks back, Satya Nadella himself spoke about IMOCA, how IMOCA is helping Microsoft in shortlisting the candidates for the job interviews. So we have filed a bunch of patents for IMOCA, and this is again very interesting patent. A lot of other patents that we have worked with. So a lot of other inventions. Every day, 2-3 नई inventions हम काम करते हैं उनके ऊपर, and it's always very interesting to work with people with different ideas in different domains. Somebody is software, somebody is mechanical, somebody is chemical, chemistry, and all of that.
On this line, Amit, why is it you think for a startup it's actually important to look at IP or even file for their patents? What is the most important thing because of which they need to look at it?
So the most important thing is they were the ones who thought about solving a problem, or if they have a solution for it, they must protect the solution. Otherwise, India mein ya kahin pe bhi, the copy will come in no time. You know why Ola came in India? Uber has filed 141 patents in the US on the Uber app. They did not file any of those patents in India. That's why Ola was born in India. If Uber would have filed those patents in India as well, Ola wouldn't have born. So, agar aapne solution nikala hai, it's very important to stop the competition. So that's the primary reason. And then, if you were the first person to think of a solution, and the investor comes to you and asks you how will you stop competition, the patent is your answer. What's your niche? What have you done? If you have a granted patent, that means the government body thinks that your invention is new, your idea is novel. The government body here is the patent office basically. If the patent office gives you a grant on the patent, that's a good indication that your invention, your idea is new, is novel. So that's why for all these factors, very important to protect your idea, because you have spent maybe a lot of time, a lot of money in inventing that, and it's very important to protect your innovation. It's very important to protect your idea. That's why patents are important. And so are trademarks.
Amit, what is the cane juice startup called?
CaneBot.
CaneBot. Interesting.
CANE bot.
Got it. It reminds me of the orange juice vending machines that you see all across Europe, right? I think there's you see them in Singapore as well, where you just click in and the orange falls down and it gets like properly squashed and the skin is aside, and then you get so this is like the best desi twist somebody is given to the vending machines. Very interesting. When I'm in India, I'll try it. Is it only in Pune or is it across Mumbai as well?
So currently they have only filed the patent, and now they would license the patent to a vending machine company and just make money based upon the royalty, or they would make the vending machines themselves. It's not currently in the market.
Okay.
So that's the beauty of a patent. You can patent the idea first, and then you can think of making it, prototyping it, launching a business, or licensing the patent. So that's the beauty of a patent.
Very interesting.
Great. Guys, I think we are good. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you sharing so many fantastic things with us. This call is being recorded. We will post the entire call on YouTube and then send you a link, and also dissect this video into small snippets, 5-minute, 4-minute video, which is digestible by people, and send across, because all what you gave today was extremely beneficial for people who are struggling, people who are trying to make ends meet, especially in these times. This knowledge you gave can be very, very handy, can be very, very helpful. Thank you so much again. We will be in touch, and I wish you a fabulous week ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Peace.